You ever look out at a piece of land you own, something quiet, peaceful, and full of memories, only to one day wake up and find 66 condos slapped down on it like it was never yours to begin with? That's exactly what happened to me. I inherited this lakeside property in Texas from my grandfather. It was more than land, it was our family's legacy. A place where we fished, camped, and just sat watching the water roll by. I never planned to sell it, never planned to build anything fancy. But the local HOA had different ideas. It started with a zoning loophole. Some slick developer partnered with the homeowners association next door and claimed a section of my land had been abandoned. They fast-tracked permits, paid off a few pockets, and next thing I knew, bulldozers were carving up my property. I was shocked. I tried everything legal action, city hall meetings, even went door to door explaining to folks that this was my land. But no one listened. The condos went up fast, 3 stories high, all cookie-cutter units packed tight. Just feet from the lake's edge. I could have kept fighting, could have drained my savings on more lawyers. But then I remembered something Grandpa once said: let the land speak for itself. See, folks had forgotten one small detail about that beautiful stretch of property. Every spring, without fail, the lake rises. And not by inches, by feet. The same condos they rushed to build. They were sitting smack in a natural floodplain. And this year, well, let's just say nature had some serious plans of its own, so I waited, quietly, patiently. Because sometimes, the best revenge doesn't come with shouting or lawsuits. Sometimes, you just let the water rise, ... and watch what happens next. I didn't have to wait long. By mid-April, the storms rolled in just like they always do out here in Texas. Thick, heavy rains soaked the soil, and the lake started swelling. I kept to myself, didn't say a word to anyone. But I watched as the new condo owners, all shiny and proud in their lakeside units, set up patios and planted little shrubs. They had no idea what was coming. Some even put in those fancy solar tiki lights and outdoor fire pits, thinking they'd found paradise. Meanwhile, I stood on my old dock, just a few yards away, remembering how many times that water had crept up past my boots over the years. The HOA had sent me letters. Of course, lots of them, accusing me of interfering, of deliberately creating drainage issues. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The land was doing the talking now. See, the truth is, my grandfather knew every inch of that property. When he passed it on to me, he handed me more than a title. He handed me stories, warnings, and the kind of wisdom you only get by living through the seasons. And one of the things he always said: never build too close to the water. She always takes back what's hers. The developers had ignored that. They filled in low areas with dirt and concrete, thinking they could tame nature. But you can't just erase a floodplain. You can't paper over decades of natural flow just because your blueprints say so. And now, those foundations, they rushed to pour. They were starting to shift. Cracks in the walkways, muddy water bubbling up through lawn seams. The residents started to notice. Whispers started. I heard them wondering why no one had told them the truth before they bought in. But the truth was always there, just buried under concrete and a whole lot of arrogance. By the time May rolled around, things were getting serious. The rain hadn't stopped for nearly a week, and the lake was pushing past its usual line. The water was licking the back patios of those condos, creeping up inch by inch, silent but certain. I kept my routine: the same coffee at dawn, a walk around the edge of the property, boots sinking just a little deeper into the muddy earth each day. People started to notice me more. Some would wave politely. Others just stared, like maybe I was the ghost of a warning they wished they'd listened to. One afternoon, a woman named Karen joke marched down to my dock, umbrella in one hand, clipboard in the other. Said she was part of the HOA's emergency committee. Told me I had to install proper drainage on my land because the flooding was causing structural concerns. I just looked at her, calm as ever, and asked, "When did you last check the county flood maps?" She blinked, had no answer. That was the thing, none of them had done their homework. They were sold a dream, and now they were waking up knee-deep in a wet reality. Meanwhile, I kept getting letters, not just from the HOA, but from residents too. Some were angry, blaming me. Others seemed worried, even scared. A few asked if I'd sell them a portion of the higher ground. I still own land that stayed dry no matter how hard it rained. But I said no, every time, because this wasn't just about property anymore. It was about what happens when people try to rewrite the deed, rules of nature, and ignore those who came before them. The tension in the community grew thicker than the humidity. Rumors started flying. Some folks said the condos might not pass the next inspection. Others whispered about lawsuits. But one thing was clear: the water wasn't done rising. And neither was the trouble. The first sirens came in the middle of the night. Heavy rains slammed the rooftops, and the lake surged like it had a mind of its own. I stood on my porch in the dark, flashlight in hand, watching as water poured over the condo walkways like a slow-moving river. Emergency lights blinked across the shoreline. I could hear shouting residents wading through knee-high water, trying to salvage what they could. Some had parked their cars too close to the edge, and now they floated sideways, bumping gently into lampposts and garden fences. By morning, the news trucks had arrived. Reporters with ponchos and mics stood near the water's edge, pointing behind them at half-submerged patios and sandbag barricades that looked too little, too late. One reporter mentioned the words floodplain violation on air. Another said developer negligence. But no one said anything about me. Not yet. I stayed quiet, watched it all unfold, just like I had planned. Inside the HOA office, things were unraveling fast. I heard one of the board members had resigned, and another was refusing to take calls. Some residents gathered at the community center, demanding answers. They wanted to know who approved the plans, who signed off on the inspections, who ignored the floodplain warnings clearly listed in the county's land records. But the paper trail was messy, and nobody wanted to take the fall. A few of the newer homeowners' families, young couples, walked over to talk to me. They weren't angry anymore. They were worried, desperate. One guy, maybe in his 30s, asked if I thought it would get worse. I looked him in the eye and said, "The lake hasn't even hit peak yet." That silence that followed told me everything. And then, just as the sky darkened again and thunder rolled over the hills, I noticed something strange: hairline cracks. Climbing the side of Building C, the same building closest to the original marsh, something was shifting beneath the surface. And I knew. The real flood hadn't even started yet. By the next morning, that small crack on Building C had become a full-blown fracture running from the foundation to the second-floor balcony. The tenants had been told to evacuate just hours before, and thank God they did. At around 5:40 a.m., part of the outer retaining wall gave way. A slow, sickening groan echoed across the lake as the earth beneath it collapsed into mud and water. No one was hurt, but that section of the condo sagged like wet cardboard, and the damage was irreversible. But here's where it got worse. One of the city inspectors, someone who'd been keeping a low profile since the project's approval, finally came forward. Quietly, off the record, he came by my property, soaked from the rain, and asked to talk. Said he remembered reviewing the site plans years ago and marked the entire flood zone as non-developable. Said those documents mysteriously disappeared after a meeting with the HOA board and the developer's attorney. Said his copy was filed, then lost, and now he couldn't live with it anymore. That hit like a punch to the gut. It confirmed what I'd suspected all along. Someone didn't just make a mistake. They buried the truth. At the same time, a group of residents had started organizing their own investigation. A few of them were tech-savvy and began digging through online public records, satellite imagery, even old surveyor maps. That's when they found something shocking. The developer had redrawn boundary lines digitally, sliding the condo footprint nearly 30 feet deeper into my original property. I hadn't just been robbed of land. I'd been erased from the plans altogether. The pressure was building literally and legally. The HOA tried calling an emergency meeting, but no one showed up. People were packing up, breaking leases, demanding refunds. But the worst hadn't come yet. The lake was still rising, and the next storm system, they said, was projected to hit within 24 hours. That meant one thing: whatever was coming next wouldn't be quiet. It would be loud, messy, and impossible to ignore. The storm hit harder than anyone expected. Overnight, the wind snapped trees like twigs, and rain pounded the lake until it swelled past every known marker. By dawn, the water had swallowed the entire lower row of condos. Building C, already weakened, gave in completely. Its corner crumbled and sank with a slow, cracking groan, tilting the rest of the structure sideways. It wasn't just damage now, it was a disaster zone. Emergency services blocked off the road. Drones flew overhead. News helicopters hovered, capturing footage that would soon go viral. The HOA tried to shift blame, saying the storm was unprecedented. But the damage was too widespread and too specific. Within hours, the city launched an official investigation. That inspector who came to me, he went public. Stood in front of cameras and told the truth. Showed copies of his original report. The part that warned against building near the waterline. People were stunned. Lawsuits started pouring in. Not just against the HOA, but against the developer, the engineering firm, and even a few local officials who had signed off on permits without due diligence. But the twist, it came when I got a letter not from the HOA, not from the city, but from the developer's legal team. Turns out, those altered maps and fake land surveys had not only moved boundaries, they had also invalidated the entire land acquisition process. The condos, according to new findings, weren't just poorly placed, they were illegally built. I now legally owned half the land underneath the complex. And since part of that land was underwater and condemned, the liability fell on them. Never lifted a finger to cause any of it. I just waited, watched, let nature handle what greed had rushed. As I stood on my high ground, dry and untouched, I watched moving trucks crawl out, one by one. The lake shimmered behind me, calm now. Still, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about land anymore. It was about respecting what you can't control. And nature? She always settles the score. In the weeks that followed, the land grew quiet again. The last of the residents packed up, and the condos were officially declared uninhabitable. The city fenced off the entire area and the developers. Name quickly disappeared from local projects. Legal teams circled for months. But with the evidence exposed and the floodplain violations undeniable, the courts ruled in my favor. I didn't demand money. I didn't ask for compensation. I just wanted the land back untouched and respected. They handed over full rights to the remaining parcels, including what was left of the buildings. I had no plans to rebuild. I let it be. The HOA dissolved soon after. Most of the original board members moved out or resigned in silence. A few of the former residents reached out, some with apologies, others just wanting closure. I held no grudges. They were sold a dream built on unstable ground, literally and legally. As for the inspector who came forward, he was rehired by the county with a new role overseeing land conservation. We still meet for coffee once in a while. Talk about how the lake never lies. The lake has since receded, calm as ever, almost like she'd finished what she came to do. Wildflowers started growing near the old foundations, and birds returned to the trees along the shore. My grandfather would have smiled, seeing it that way, raw, real, and untouched by arrogance. So what's the lesson here? Maybe it's that no amount of concrete or paperwork can change what the land already knows. Maybe it's that shortcuts and silence catch up with you, one way or another. But mostly, it's this: when you push nature too far, she doesn't fight back with rage, she waits. And when the time is right, she takes back what's hers, one quiet wave at a time.